There was no warning, just a sharp tug on the reins, a violent buck beneath her, and then the world spun. Mary's heart raced, each beat louder than the thunderous hooves pounding beneath her. The wild stallion, a beast as black as night with eyes that glowed with untamed fury, bucked again. His mane whipped like a storm as he surged forward, and Mary, gripping the saddle with a desperation she hadn't known she was capable of, fought to stay on. She had always been the kind of person who had everything under control. She was a mother, a wife, a worker, someone who understood the rules of life and played by them. But here she was, clinging to the back of an animal who wanted nothing more than to throw her off. And she didn't even know how it had happened. The crowd around her was nothing but a blur. Spectators cheered and screamed, some in awe, some in disbelief. They weren't the ones riding the wildest horse in the county. She was. The same woman who had never ridden anything faster than a lazy pony for children. The same woman who had never even been close to a creature like this. "Hold on, Mary," someone shouted from the sidelines, but her grip was faltering. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with the dust kicked up by the horse's thrashing. Her breath was ragged, and her mind screamed, "Let go! You can't do this! You're not built for this." But there was no way out now. The stallion's powerful muscles surged, and with a terrifying lurch he reared up on his hind legs, making a guttural sound deep in his chest. The roar of the crowd filled the air, but in that moment the noise faded. There was only her and the horse. "Hold on," she repeated to herself, her fingers locked around the reins. Her life had been a series of carefully constructed choices, each one building to this point. She had lived in the shadows of her own quiet world for years, never daring to step beyond what she knew. But now, in this moment, everything was different. The wildness of the horse matched something deeper inside her, a wildness she'd ignored for too long. The stallion finally slammed back down onto all fours with a jarring impact, sending a wave of pain through Mary's body. But instead of letting go, she fought harder, digging her heels into the horse's sides, urging him forward. It was then that she remembered the challenge, the dare that had pushed her into this moment. The local rodeo was known for its brutality. Only the most daring, the most foolhardy, and the strongest could stay on the back of the wild stallion for more than a few seconds. It was a test, one that few women had ever dared to take. But she hadn't been dared. She had volunteered, driven by something in her she could not explain. Her mind flashed back to the moment she'd agreed to do this. The small bar, the dusty rodeo posters plastered on the walls. The conversation that had started as a joke had quickly turned serious. "You could never do it, Mary," one of the locals had teased. "You don't have the guts. You're just a housewife, a mom, the kind of woman who knows her place." And there, in that moment, something inside her had snapped. No one ever spoke to her that way. No one ever doubted her. Her gaze flicked to the side, where a figure stood in the crowd, watching her intently. The man who had taunted her, the one who had insisted that she would never make it. He grinned now, his face twisted with amusement, but there was a hint of something else there, a challenge, a wave of anger flooded Mary's chest. How dare he? How dare anyone think she couldn't do this? She was more than just a wife. She was more than just a mother. She was someone who would fight with every ounce of her being, even if it meant being thrown into the wildest challenge imaginable. The horse bucked again, nearly throwing her to the ground. But Mary was no longer just hanging on. She was fighting back. Her body moved with the rhythm of the beast, no longer a victim of his fury. She was becoming one with the animal, her strength merging with his power. She could feel the wildness of the horse calling to her, tapping into a strength she didn't know she had. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The wild stallion, exhausted from its own battle, began to slow, its movements more sluggish. Mary didn't relent. She had tamed the beast inside herself, and now she would tame the one beneath her. With one final surge of determination, she brought the stallion under control. The crowd erupted into applause, but Mary hardly heard them. Her hands shook as she pulled the reins tight, bringing the horse to a stop. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, but her heart was thundering with triumph. She had done it. Against all odds, she had stayed on, but as the cheers echoed in her ears, something strange began to stir inside her. A feeling she couldn't quite place, like the calm before a storm. She turned to face the crowd, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of something darker lurking beneath the surface. That man, the one who had doubted her. He wasn't clapping. His face had gone pale, and he was staring at her as if she had done something more than just ride a horse. As if she had uncovered a secret. But what could it be? What did he know that she didn't? The rodeo announcer stepped up to congratulate her, but her mind was racing. Something was off. She had tamed the horse, but had she tamed the chaos within herself, or had she just unleashed it? Mary stood in the center of the arena, the deafening applause still ringing in her ears. The wild stallion beneath her was breathing heavily, but it no longer felt like a beast of fury. The thunderous applause echoed in the dusty air, but for some reason it felt hollow to her now. She had won. She had conquered the wildest horse anyone had ever dared to ride, and yet something gnawed at her, an unease deep within her chest. The man in the crowd hadn't clapped, the man who had doubted her, the one who had called her just a housewife, just a mother, with no business taking part in something as dangerous as this. Why had he stopped grinning? Why had his face gone ashen when she stayed on the horse? Her stomach twisted as she glanced around, searching for him. She saw him now, standing in the far corner of the arena, still watching her, his face unreadable. She felt a sudden chill run down her spine. As the crowd began to thin, she slowly dismounted, her legs still shaky from the wild ride. She felt every muscle in her body scream for relief, but the adrenaline that surged through her kept her standing tall. Her heart was still racing, her thoughts scattered. She had done what no one thought possible. But at what cost? The announcer approached her with a microphone in hand, his smile wide. "Mary Turner, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for this brave woman who took on the wildest stallion in the county and tamed him." The crowd clapped, but Mary barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on the man who had been watching her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a mixture of surprise and something else, something darker. "Mary, congratulations. How does it feel to have conquered that beast?" the announcer asked, pulling her out of her reverie. She smiled faintly, trying to keep up the appearance of a champion. "It feels amazing," she said, her voice steady, but her mind still racing. She knew she had done something remarkable, but it felt like she had crossed a threshold into something unknown. The announcer, still beaming, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done something no one else has ever dared to do." But what's next for Mary Turner? The question echoed in her mind. What was next? She had spent so many years living in the shadows of her own life, never venturing beyond her role as a mother and wife. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to her than just those labels. The thought unsettled her, but she couldn't ignore it. As she stood there, the reality of the situation began to sink in. She had tamed the wildest horse, but there was something wilder inside her that she had only just begun to understand. And that man, his eyes had told her more than he realized. He knew something. She had to know what it was. The announcer wrapped up his interview with her, and she quickly excused herself, making her way toward the exit of the arena. The man was still standing in the corner, his gaze unwavering. Her footsteps faltered as she approached him. He had been right all along. She wasn't supposed to do this. She wasn't supposed to be the kind of woman who rode wild horses, who stood up to the challenge. But here she was, and now the mystery of his strange behavior weighed heavily on her. "You were amazing out there," the man said as she neared, his voice smooth but with a hint of something deeper. "I never thought you'd make it." Mary stopped a few feet away from him, her eyes narrowing. "What's your name?" she asked, her tone sharp. He hesitated, then extended his hand. "Nathan West. I've been following this rodeo for years." Mary shook his hand, but didn't let go. "You didn't seem too impressed by my performance," she said, her voice cold. Nathan's lips twisted into a half-smile. "I was impressed, but there's something you don't know about that horse," he said, his voice lowering. A chill ran down her spine. "What do you mean?" Nathan looked around, ensuring no one was listening. "That horse, the one you rode, is not just any wild stallion. He's been used in illegal betting rings. He's been through hell. People have died trying to break him. And the thing is, you shouldn't have been able to stay on him. You're different. I don't know how, but you're different." Mary's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you mean by different?" she asked, her voice shaking. Nathan took a deep breath, his gaze flicking nervously toward the exit. "There's something in you that responded to that horse. It's like you two are connected. I've seen this before, but never like this. Never with someone like you." Mary's mind raced. What was he saying? Was it possible? Was there something about her, something in her past that she hadn't understood? Nathan's face hardened as he leaned in closer. "Listen, Mary, there's more going on here than you realize, and you need to know. You need to find out what it is." Mary's mind was spinning. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, suddenly feeling like the ground beneath her was shifting. Nathan's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. "You're not just a mother. You're not just a wife. And you're certainly not just someone who rides horses. You're connected to something darker, something dangerous." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating her. Mary felt a wave of confusion and fear wash over her. She stepped back, her mind reeling. Nathan reached out to steady her, but she pulled away. "I don't understand," she muttered, feeling more lost than ever before. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't expect you to understand, but you need to. There are people who know what you can do, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Mary's head spun, and her chest tightened with panic. What had she gotten herself into? She had come to this rodeo to prove something to herself, to escape the monotony of her life. But now it felt like she had stepped into a nightmare from which there was no escape. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's eyes softened for a moment, a hint of sympathy crossing his face. "I wish I could explain more, but I can't. Not yet. Just know this, Mary. You've been marked, and you'll never be able to go back to the life you knew." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her legs shaking, her mind reeling with a mixture of disbelief and fear. She had ridden the wildest horse, but now she wondered if the real wildness was waiting for her on the other side of the arena. Mary's mind was a blur as she left the arena. She could still feel the echoes of the crowd's applause ringing in her ears, but they had long since lost their triumph. Instead, the words Nathan had whispered to her played on a loop in her head. "You've been marked, and you'll never be able to go back to the life you knew." What did he mean? How could she, someone as ordinary as her, be involved in something so dangerous? She had only come here for a thrill, a brief escape from the predictable monotony of her life, and yet now it felt as if everything had changed. Her victory over the stallion suddenly seemed trivial compared to the chaos Nathan had hinted at. She climbed into her truck, hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. She needed to get home. She needed to see her husband, Tom, and feel the safety of her ordinary life again. But as she turned the ignition, she knew it wasn't that simple. Nathan's words had planted a seed of doubt, one that refused to be ignored. The drive home was agonizing. Every passing mile seemed to stretch longer than the last, her mind racing with questions, her heart beating faster with each thought. What was Nathan talking about? What connection could there be between her and that wild horse? She was just a regular woman, no different from the others who had attended the rodeo that day, and yet her ride had been different. She had felt something, a strange power, a connection, something beyond the physicality of riding a horse. She pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of her home offering little comfort. The house seemed cold, distant, like a place she no longer belonged. She stepped out of the truck, her feet heavy as she made her way to the front door. Tom was sitting in the living room, the sound of the television filling the otherwise quiet house. He looked up when she entered, a warm smile spreading across his face, but when he saw her, something in his expression shifted. His eyes flickered with concern, his gaze scanning her face, as if searching for something. "You okay?" he asked, setting down the remote. Mary forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said, though the words felt hollow. "You don't look fine. What happened out there?" "I did it," she replied softly, sitting down on the couch. "I rode the wildest horse they've got. I won." She let out a shaky breath, trying to convey the pride she should have been feeling. Instead, all she felt was an unsettling emptiness. Tom raised an eyebrow. "I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd go through with it." "Neither did I," Mary admitted, her voice trembling slightly. She looked at Tom, searching for some comfort, but the truth was, she wasn't sure she could talk to him about this. Not yet. Tom reached over, taking her hand in his. "It's over now, right? You can put all of that behind you." Mary opened her mouth to respond, but Nathan's words stopped her. "You've been marked." The weight of those words, the way Nathan had looked at her, made it impossible to push the fear aside. What if everything she had known was about to change? "I'm not sure," she said quietly. "I think something's happening, something more than I realize." Tom looked at her, confusion etching his features. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. How could she explain the strange pull she had felt while riding that horse? How could she describe the unsettling feeling in the pit of her stomach when Nathan had spoken about her being marked? No, it wasn't something she could explain easily. "Never mind," she said finally, squeezing his hand. "I'll figure it out." But as the night wore on, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that her life was slipping away from her. She couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, the image of the stallion's eyes flashing in her mind. The wildness, the untamed force had felt like a mirror reflecting something inside her. Was it possible? Could Nathan have been right? In the quiet of the house, she found herself staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spiraling. She had lived for so long in the shadow of her responsibilities, in the comfort of predictability. But what if that comfort was a lie? What if there was something more, something dangerous waiting for her? At dawn, after barely sleeping a wink, Mary knew she couldn't stay at home any longer. She needed answers. She needed to understand what Nathan had meant. She got dressed quickly, her mind already made up. She couldn't wait around for the truth to come to her. She had to seek it out. Mary headed to the barn behind their house, where she had spent so many hours cleaning and tending to the animals. It had been years since she'd been close to the horses they kept. Tom had taken over their care after the kids had grown, and she had let the farm life slip away. But now, she needed to reconnect with something familiar, something that could ground her. She approached the fence and saw the horses grazing in the early morning light. But one horse stood apart from the others, her old mare, Ginger. The horse had been with her for years, through all the ups and downs, and the bond between them had always been strong. She knew Ginger better than any other horse, and for some reason she felt drawn to her now. Mary climbed over the fence and walked toward Ginger, her hands trembling. As she approached, the horse looked up, ears flicking toward her. Ginger's gaze was soft, almost knowing, and it brought a sense of peace to Mary. "You're not like that stallion," Mary whispered to the mare, brushing her hand over the horse's mane. "You've always been kind to me." But as she stood there, something strange happened. The air grew thick with tension, the same tension she had felt when she'd ridden the wild stallion. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum, a deep vibration that rattled her bones. Ginger began to paw at the ground nervously, snorting and stamping her hooves. Mary stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't right. Ginger had never acted like this before. The calm horse she had known for years was suddenly restless, as if something was stirring inside her, and then she felt it. A sudden rush of energy, a sharp crackle in the air. The connection Mary had felt with the wild stallion came rushing back, stronger than ever before. The same force that had driven her to ride the horse was now coursing through her veins. She could hear the beat of the horse's heart as if it were her own. She could feel the animal's fear, its confusion, its yearning for freedom. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was something much deeper. There was something inside her, something ancient, something that tied her to these creatures in ways she could not yet understand. Ginger reared up suddenly, her hooves crashing against the earth with a deafening sound. Mary stepped back quickly, her heart in her throat. The mare's eyes were wide, and her body trembled with energy. It was as if Ginger could sense what was happening, as if she, too, could feel the bond between them. Mary's head spun. This couldn't be real, but it was. The truth that Nathan had hinted at was beginning to take shape in her mind. She wasn't just a woman who had ridden a wild horse. She wasn't just a wife and mother living in the quiet suburbs. She was connected to something darker, something primal. And that connection wasn't something she could walk away from. The night after Mary's unsettling encounter with Ginger, she barely slept. She had been awake for hours, staring into the darkness of her bedroom, the shadows of the past pressing in on her. The bond she had felt with the wild stallion, the same connection now surging through her as she stood in the barn with Ginger. None of it made sense, but she could no longer deny it. There was something inside her, something that had awakened, something far beyond anything she could understand. The next morning she woke with a sense of urgency, a need to find answers. She had to know why this was happening to her. What did Nathan mean when he said she was marked? What was this connection to the horses? And why had Ginger, the most docile of horses, suddenly reacted as if she were touched by the same wild energy that had driven the stallion? Mary's thoughts raced as she prepared breakfast for Tom and the kids. Her hands moved mechanically as she chopped vegetables for the omelette, her mind far away, locked in a battle with questions she couldn't answer. She had always been the kind of person who found comfort in routine, in predictable, everyday tasks. But now the very routine she had clung to felt suffocating. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was changing, and if she didn't figure out what it was, she feared she might lose control. "Mom, you okay?" Her daughter, Lily, asked, her voice pulling Mary out of her thoughts. Lily was standing in the doorway, a concerned look on her face. Mary forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just a little tired." "Did something happen at the rodeo? You look different," Lily said, her eyes scanning her mother's face as if searching for an answer. Mary paused. Was she different? She certainly felt different. The weight in her chest, the tightness in her throat, these weren't just nerves or exhaustion from the rodeo. There was something inside her that had changed, and Lily had noticed it, even if she couldn't articulate it. "I'll be okay," Mary said, shaking off her daughter's worry. "Let's eat breakfast. We've got a busy day ahead." As they sat down at the kitchen table, Mary tried to push aside the whirlwind of thoughts that had consumed her. But as soon as Tom walked into the room, his concerned gaze falling on The tension returned. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Mary looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always been honest with Tom, always shared her thoughts and fears with him. But now she couldn't bring herself to tell him about the strange pull she felt, the terrifying connection she had with the wild horses. She couldn't explain it to him, not yet. "I'm just tired, Tom," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine." But Tom wasn't convinced. He narrowed his eyes, his expression one of suspicion. "Something's wrong, Mary. You don't just tire from riding a horse. You've always been strong. But there's something different about you now." Mary's stomach tightened. She could feel the weight of his gaze, but she wasn't ready to share the truth. Not yet. Tom sighed, but he let it go. For now. They ate their breakfast in silence, the unease between them palpable. Later that morning, after the kids had left for school, Mary drove to the local library. She had spent the last few hours trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that had crept over her, but she couldn't. She had to know the truth. She had to find out what Nathan had meant when he said she was marked. Mary had never been the type to believe in superstitions or the supernatural, but she couldn't deny what she had felt. There was something primal about the bond between her and the horses. It was almost as if she had tapped into something ancient, something forgotten, a force that had always been there, lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The library was quiet when she arrived, the smell of old books and dust filling the air. She made her way to the back, where the old dusty archives were kept, and began searching through the books on local history. She had no idea what she was looking for, but something deep within her urged her to dig into the past. If she could uncover the secrets of the land, perhaps she could understand what was happening to her. Hours passed as Mary sifted through one book after another, but she found nothing that seemed to fit. There were stories about the town's early settlers, old legends about wild horses, but nothing that spoke to the strange events she had experienced. Frustration bubbled up inside her. She was about to give up when her eyes fell on a small, leather-bound book tucked away on the bottom shelf. The title read, "The Horse Whisperers, Ancient Bonds and Mystical Connections." Mary hesitated for a moment. The title sounded absurd, but something compelled her to pull it from the shelf. She flipped through the yellowed pages, her eyes scanning the words. As she read, her heart began to race. The book described an ancient, almost forgotten tradition among horse breeders, a ritual passed down through generations that was said to create a mystical bond between a rider and the horse. It spoke of the ability to connect with a horse on a deeper level, to understand its thoughts, its emotions, its very soul. The book described how only certain people, those with a rare connection to the horses, could form this bond. It was an ability that was both a gift and a curse, for once the bond was formed, it could never be broken. And it wasn't just the rider who changed. The horses, too, would become different, more powerful, more unpredictable, as if they were connected to a force far beyond the physical world. The book even mentioned a group of riders known as the Marked Ones, people who had been chosen by the horses to form these bonds. But the book didn't go into detail about who these people were or what had happened to them. Mary's fingers trembled as she turned the pages. This was it. This was the answer she had been searching for. But as she read on, the sense of dread grew. The final chapter spoke of the dangers of the bond, the toll it could take on the rider and the horse. It warned that those who formed these connections could lose control, becoming slaves to the power that flowed between them. And worse, it hinted at a shadowy organization that sought to harness this power for their own purposes, an organization that would stop at nothing to control those who were marked. The words blurred in front of her eyes as the weight of what she had read sank in. She wasn't just connected to the horses in some mystical way. She had been chosen. but chosen for what? And by whom? Mary closed the book with a snap, her mind reeling. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. The quiet of the library suddenly felt oppressive, the air heavy with the realization that her life had just taken a terrifying turn. She had to get out of there. She had to find Nathan. He was the only one who could explain what was happening to her. But as she stood to leave, something caught her eye. It was a small photograph tucked into the back of the book. She picked it up, her heart racing once again. The photo was old, faded, but there was no mistaking the person in the picture. It was Nathan West, his face young and full of determination, standing beside a horse that looked eerily familiar. The same wild stallion she had ridden, and beneath the photo, written in a scrawling hand, were the words, "The marked one destined to awaken the power, the end."